Yes, I think we have started. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Institute of Chinese Studies, Delhi, let me welcome you all to our weekly ICS Wednesday seminar. The topic for today's seminar is China's undiplomatic diplomacy. And to explore the subject, we have today with us Ambassador Kishan Rana and Ambassador Shyam Saran. Our speaker for today is Ambassador Kishan Rana. Ambassador Rana is former Ambassador, High Commissioner of India to Algeria, Czechoslovakia, Kenya, Mauritius, and Germany, former Joint Secretary, PMO, and is currently Emeritus Fellow at the Institute of Chinese Studies, Delhi, Professor Emeritus, Diplo Foundation, and Archives by Fellow at the Churchill College, Cambridge. Ambassador Rana has a master's in economics from the prestigious St. Stephen's College, University of Delhi, and has authored and edited 11 books on diplomatic studies, and 2 were translated into Chinese. He has also written around 300 articles and book reviews in several journals and newspapers. We welcome you, sir. We also have with us Ambassador Shyam Saran, who will be our chair this afternoon. Ambassador Shyam Saran is former Foreign Secretary of India and has served as Prime Minister's Special Envoy for Nuclear Affairs and Climate Change. He is currently member of the governing body of the Institute of Chinese Studies, Delhi, and of the Center for Policy Research, and member of the Executive Council of the Federation of Indian Chambers of Commerce and Industry, among several others. He has also headed the Research and Information System for Developing Countries, a prestigious think tank focusing on economic issues, and was chairman of the National Security Advisory Board under the National Security Council from 2013 to 2015. Ambassador Shyam Saran was awarded the Padma Bhushan in 2011 for his contributions to civil service, and in May 2019, he was conferred the Spring Order Gold and Silver Star by the Emperor of Japan for promoting India-Japan relations. Before I invite the chair to conduct the proceedings, let me explain some ground rules. All participants shall be muted when the speaker makes his presentation. Once the chair has opened the floor for Q&A, participants may indicate their interest in asking questions by using the raise hand option available at the bottom of the list of participants. Questions can also be sent to us through the chat option. The chair will call upon the participants to ask their questions. The concerned participant will unmute himself or herself. Meanwhile, other participants are requested to keep themselves muted. I will now invite the chair, Ambassador Shyam Saran, to begin the proceedings and offer his opening remarks. Over to you, Ambassador Saran.
Are you able to hear me?
Yes, yes, sir.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much, Rija, for that introduction. And it's a great honor for me, a very great privilege as well, that I have, Ambassador Kishan Rana, one of our peers, who will be talking to us about a subject which is of great topical interest. And I'm really very honored that he has given me this honor of chairing this session. Ambassador will be talking about, as he says, China's undiplomatic diplomacy, which of course, has reference to what we have become used to over the last couple of years. That is what is being called the wolf warrior diplomacy on part of China. But of course, even though this is something which is very much being talked about, the fact is that this is a kind of a conduct which we have also witnessed in the past. But perhaps it is much more salient today because China is a much more influential power today than it was in the past. But this is not something of a major departure in China's external behavior. So what Ambassador Rana, I think, will be doing is to basically give us a certain sense of the backdrop to this diplomacy. What is the Chinese, political and economic status at this point of time? Where does it locate itself in the international arena? And how that is, in a sense, linked to its external behavior. How is it relating to countries around the world? It has, categorized countries into those who are, its peers. So it is a great power relationship, for example, with the United States. There is also another category of states which is neighborhood. That is a kind of a special category, and sort of different norms apply to that. Then there is the constituency of developing countries, who also China looks upon as a very major constituency for it to extend its influence. So there is this kind of ordering of the world around itself, and then its foreign policy conduct is aligned with these different categories. But Ambassador Rana is perhaps the most appropriate person to talk about this, because he's really spent years in really looking at foreign policy behavior of different states. What is the institutional framework through which countries, in fact, formulate their foreign policies? What is the institutional framework through which those foreign policies are implemented? He has done comparative studies of some of the major, diplomatic actors in the world. So this is a subject that he really is most, I think, suited to address. So since this is something which is basically our opportunity to listen to what Ambassador Rana is able to put before us. Without any further ado, let me invite Ambassador Rana to kindly make this presentation. Sir, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Shyam. You've been exceedingly generous, and I don't think I deserve all the fine things you've said. But as they say in Germany, many thanks for the flowers. The title, undiplomatic, the word undiplomatic in the title is, of course, used with a little bit of a sense of mischief, because in fact, nothing is undiplomatic. The diplomacy business is used to many, many, many kinds of actions. And we can all think of examples when undiplomatic really became part of diplomacy. What I want to stress is that while some hard actions from China have emerged from time to time, the past year has seen a fairly big clustering of these actions directed at several countries. And we'll get into that in a moment. You may remember that way back in 2009, that is 12 years back, when Norway awarded a Nobel Prize to a Chinese dissident who was in jail, they faced a huge amount of reprisals from China. Reprisals in trade. Smoked salmon, for example, could no longer be exported to China, and etc. And the squeeze was so tough that, in effect, Norway kind of acknowledged that it had erred in that particular action. Everything was not made public, but this is widely known. A similar dispute with South Korea over the THAAD missile system also saw a great deal of hard responses from China. So, as Shyam put it very clearly, these are not new things. But what is new is this clustering and perhaps an increased sharpness, which wasn't so noticeable in the past. I want to make three big points. First, to locate China in its current context, political and economic. Second, to say a little bit about the foreign ministry, a little bit about the details of its operation and how, in my view, this is perhaps relevant. And third, to try and draw some conclusions. Now, let me begin with the positioning of China. All the talk about China's decline is wishful thinking. China is not declining, and if anything, the COVID-19 pandemic has left China far stronger than any other major economy. This year, it is expected to grow, or it has grown probably at around 2.7%, as estimated by international financial institutions, when every other major economy has had negative growth, that is, setbacks. The Economist, in the special terse manner, which is its hallmark, uh, summed it up in two words: advantage China. But while China struts the world, and there is a large element of overconfidence, perhaps, China is a normal country. It makes, like any country, it makes its calculations. It wins some, it loses some. It looks for opportunistic gain, and ultimately, it pursues its own interests. I think one hallmark of Chinese action has long been a degree of caution. But once it decides to act, it acts with absolute, shall we say, relentless determination. This is a fact of life. We have seen this as others have. Part of the larger context is that BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative, which, as you know, was written into the Chinese constitution, no less, has been a victim of the pandemic in several ways. I can't get into it in detail, but you know the basic facts. In effect, somewhere in the region of $1 trillion, probably more, have already been spent on this project, and the returns are some distance away. And some returns may not perhaps materialize for a variety of reasons. Not that these were necessarily bad projects, a few were, but also many of the projects were infrastructure projects, railway lines, etc., of such a nature that the economic return is very slow in coming, although the social return may be much quicker and much better. But the social return accrues only to the country concerned, and it doesn't generate the dollari with which you can pay back the fairly stiff terms on which the loans have been given. We can get into that if somebody is interested. Let me turn to the Chinese Foreign Ministry and get a little bit into details. It's a very unusual institution. It's the world's second biggest diplomatic service, with around 7,500 diplomats. By the way, it's the only diplomatic service in the world that does not have any diplomatic support staff. It has service staff, technicians and people who cook and do all those kind of things. But in the diplomatic service, everybody is a diplomat. And I can get into details if somebody's interested, but this is a little bit arcane for most people. The other unusual element is, and I heard this from a number of Chinese while I was doing my research for the book Asian Diplomacy. It's a foreign ministry that has not enjoyed high status within the national system, unlike most foreign ministries around the world. And I used to hear lament, actually, from the people who were willing to speak up a little bit openly, that their domestic standing was not really very high at all. Things changed. Wang Jiechi, former foreign minister, was made a Politburo member in 2017, for the first time that anybody from the diplomatic family had been elevated to Politburo status, I think for a good 20 years perhaps. And Wang Yi was the foreign minister, the current foreign minister, was taken into the central committee and then made a state councillor. The other big event that took place in March 2018, which has really not been studied sufficiently by most people, is that a massive countrywide, system-wide reorganization was carried out in March of that year. And this affected the foreign ministry as it affected many, many ministries, including BRI, by the way. Two major events. For the first time, a Central Foreign Affairs Commission was created. Mind you, please remember, China is not a country that easily experiments with its institutions. There is a great deal of, shall we say, permanence to institutions. This, incidentally, is a point of absolute comparison with Germany, another country that does not easily toy around with its institutions. Now, this Central Foreign Affairs Commission was clearly created in part to deal with the long-standing rivalry between the Foreign Ministry and the Commerce Ministry. Many of us would shrug our shoulders and say, what's new in that? Because the Commerce Ministry was in charge of all aid issues. So the Foreign Ministry had really very little clout in that area. I must also add, in a small aside, I used to hear from Chinese diplomats a candid comment that, we will issue instructions to X or Y ministry. And I used to tell myself, how can anyone believe in this day and age that one ministry can issue instructions to another? But this was a kind of way of thinking that had existed in the foreign ministry, probably a legacy from the Zhou Enlai days. You remember, Zhou Enlai was his own foreign minister till 1958, when he handed over the foreign ministry to Chen Yi. But till his death, Zhou Enlai was in charge of foreign affairs. You may or may not know that even when he was in his final bout of cancer, he used to go from his hospital bed to state functions and come back to his hospital bed. Zhou Enlai was truly a remarkable individual in many, many respects. But again, that's an aside. The other, mind you, there were other changes carried out also. And another change affecting the foreign ministry was the creation of Sidka, which is, again, an agency to exclusively handle aid jointly with the foreign ministry. That is, foreign ministry got a look into this process. Now, let me get a little bit into detail and bombard you with a few points. Getting into the foreign ministry is considered very much a matter of honor. It has always attracted elites. But there was a period in the late 90s when its attractiveness declined and a fair number of young people began leaving the foreign ministry. And that, again, reversed itself. Today, it remains attractive, but my suspicion is, I don't have up-to-date data, I must confess. My data more or less ends around 2017 or 18. I think its attraction has declined. The promotion system in the foreign ministry is very unusual. Again, entirely like the Germans and a little bit like the British system as well. Everybody moves in lockstep for the first 8 or 10 years. 8 or 10 depends on whether they have a postgraduate degree or not. And these days, everybody has a postgraduate degree, an MA. That means 8 years they are in lockstep, and then those who are considered to be outstanding zoom 2, sometimes 3 levels above the cohort. So you have a situation where somebody at 48 can become a vice foreign minister. Although for the first 8 years, he was locked in step with his cohort. Um, Funds are tight. Again, it's a situation that we in India have known in the ministry. It doesn't get funding as it wants to get. Um I saw this vividly when visiting the Foreign Affairs University at its new location, new campus on the Fifth Ring Road. And as you can figure out, the Fifth Ring Road is rather far from the center of Beijing. As I asked about a vacant piece of land that adjoined this campus, and I was told that that is where the Foreign Ministry's Training Institute is to come up. But it hasn't because the Foreign Ministry doesn't have the funds for building its institute. Maybe that institute has been built in the last year or two, but again, it sounded like a fairly familiar situation. Um A major development took place in 2013 when a highly experienced vice foreign minister from the commerce ministry was brought into the foreign ministry for the first time that any such step was taken. So there was an effort at integrating, or let us say, getting the two ministries to work closer together. China holds every 10, 15 years a so-called work conference of the foreign ministry. Details are not published, but a kind of summary account does come out. And in the account that was published in 2018, that is when the meeting took place, President Xi Jinping was quoted to have said that there was a need to improve working conditions abroad. Again, sounds a little bit familiar. The problem, of course, has been that of divided families. Um, Chinese foreign ministry officials are paid rather little, and they cannot afford to have their spouses abandon their working jobs and join them abroad. And you can imagine this causes a great deal of unhappiness. By the way, the foreign ministry's budget, as reported in a publication uh, in which looked at the figures for 2017. I don't know where they got hold of the figures. It said that the Chinese foreign ministry's budget was equivalent to dollars 8 billion. Germany, with a foreign service half the size of China's, was 16 billion, and the United States, with a much bigger foreign service of about 13,000, the budget was, State Department's budget was $31 billion. Now, mind you, these figures cannot really be compared because each one calculates its figures differently. I mean, in India, for example, MEA's budget includes the payments we make to international organizations. It includes the aid funds that we disburse. So you have to really get into the budget a little bit to figure out what is really the money that comes to the ministry. But this happens in many countries. Another point, in 2019, a major official of the party who belonged to its very powerful organization department, Chi Yu, was brought in as the party secretary of the foreign ministry. Now, this is interesting. In the past, the foreign minister was also the party secretary. I don't know in which year the two positions were divided. And they are divided in many, many institutions in China. For example, every province has a party secretary and a governor. And please note, the party secretary outranks the governor. So the position of party secretary is very powerful. In the foreign ministry, the party secretary does not outrank the foreign minister, but he has full minister status. Again, it shows a tightening of discipline within the ministry. And a last point on this. When PRI took off, and when BRI became more and more, shall we say, a proposition involving billions and tens of billions of dollars invested in a single country, some of us predicted that China would not be able to stick to its earlier position that um, it would not get involved in the internal affairs of countries. We now see around us in Nepal, in Sri Lanka to an extent, certainly in Pakistan, a fairly tight Chinese involvement in the internal politics of these countries. Shall we say to safeguard its investment? We saw it in the Maldives, for example, tiny state, but nevertheless considered to be of strategic interest to China. So we now see a situation where China is getting its fingers stuck in different places, and this can only have consequences. Okay, let me come to my third big point, and that is to say, what does all this add up to? If China gets tough with Australia, as it has, I don't know if you remember, the 14-point demand that the foreign ministry put forward to Australia, saying that these are the points on which Australia has given us offense. A very unusual kind of listing. Again, an example of somewhat undiplomatic actions, but that is the Chinese way, perhaps. And of course, we have seen on our own border the tensions that have emerged suddenly, unexpectedly, in ways to which, in ways for which there is no easy explanation. Uh, I see Dipankar Saab wriggling his toes. I mean, this is the beauty of the video camera, that it will catch you doing all kinds of little things that you may not want to actually show. Be as it may. So I want to put forward, sorry, Dipankar, sorry to be a little mischievous with you. Uh, the, the proposition I want to put forward is something that for which I have no proof. I blame Ravi for implanting this idea in my mind that I should call this a proposition. But these are elements that we might need to think over. One of them is that with the huge investment in BRI of a trillion plus dollars, uh, don't you think there is some demand, some questioning as to how and why these funds have been spent so widely and sometimes recklessly, because a lot of money has gone into payments of, shall we say, rent to local dignitaries. And of course, many others have also fed from that particular trough. So, should we not imagine that there are people who are now asking questions about that? And my second proposition, connected with the first one, is that after the pandemic and all the things that happened, um, would there not be people in China who are aware that 1.4 million people have died across the globe, and that some 12 million, 15 million are affected by the virus, and that this has brought a huge amount of upheaval literally in every country in the world? China has managed its affairs very well, fortuitously, because it had in place a system of um, uh, recognition, a system of surveillance that made it possible to track down those who were infected and therefore who were their connections. It's part of a long story, but you know that story. I don't have to repeat it. No other country has anything remotely comparable as a system. So China has contained the pandemic at home, although some events do come up, some pockets of infection do come up, and that just tells you how what a pandemic is all about, that you may do your utmost, but the virus will somehow get through. From that point of view, was there something that China could have done earlier when it engaged in its internal lockdown on January 22 or 24? Should there should there not have been an international travel lockdown also from China? And that was delayed by a good 6 weeks, 8 weeks. People don't want to talk about this. The Chinese certainly get very, very upset if people talk about this. But I'm afraid the facts are there. They are not going to disappear. And I'm pretty sure that there are many people in China who are also acutely conscious of how and where this pandemic originated. So, my simple question is this not also something that has created pressures on the leadership of the country? Having made this proposition, put forward this proposition with no proof at all, I would shift to the larger question of, or the pertinent question for us: how do we deal with it? The External Affairs Minister made what I thought was a fine statement on the 28th of January at the All India Conference of China Studies, where he put forward his 8-point formula. And the manner in which the Chinese Foreign Ministry reacted to this, saying that the border issue should not be connected with bilateral relations. I mean, it is such an extraordinary statement in terms of, what should I say, its audacity, its inaccuracy, and its complete lack of connectivity of events. How can a border dispute, how can the killing, the first ever killing in large numbers on a border that had been tranquil since 1975, not be connected with bilateral relations? It is a huge blot on bilateral relations. Anybody would understand that. It's not something that we can even begin to debate. And yet we have this proposition. This gets me to the larger point, which is that the Chinese diplomatic system, this again is a proposition, I have no proof of it. My proposition is that the diplomatic system is under huge party pressure. And this incidentally connects with some research which Jabin Jacob and Bhim Subba have been carrying out in terms of tracking down who are the recent Chinese ambassadors sent out. And they have noted that for a few years now, and this is not something that began last year, that for a few years now, there is a new phenomenon that people from provinces, people from different backgrounds are being sent out as ambassadors. Now, mind you, the Chinese system was entirely a professional service right up to the time of 2010, 2012. Everybody who went abroad was a member of the foreign ministry, or in a few exceptions, had worked in a foreign affairs office in a province, meaning he was a provincial office official, but with connections with the foreign ministry, with having handled foreign ministry related work. Now you have people being sent out from different agencies. Now, what pressure does this create on a system which is already under intense internal competition because of the promotions system? The apex is a very, very narrow one. The base is very large. So everybody wants to be the top Boy Scout, wants to do more than anybody else. And that is where we see this kind of effort to outshine everybody else. And shall we say, win kudos at home. In any country in the world, any country, when diplomats, negotiators, people who represent the country begin to act and behave in the sense of how they are being perceived at home, you can imagine that diplomacy, in the real sense of the word, takes a backseat. Your first goal is to make sure that you impress your own home constituencies. Mind you, this is not unique to China. It has happened in other parts of the world, and I won't go further than that. But be as it may, these are new challenges that this particular system now faces. And the consequence is uh, a system that has become unpredictable in some ways, acts in an unusual fashion, and pushes perhaps harder than it need to, even in terms of its own interests, I would submit. So where does that leave us? I have no answers. It would be presumptuous for me to think that somebody who's been outside the system for 25 years and has no access to anything that goes on within the system can say anything more than to suggest that in the absence of hard information, I think it behoves us, I will respectfully submit to my colleagues, my former colleagues, my academic friends, and others. It behoves us, I think, to support our system. Because just as, and now I speak for those who were in the Foreign Service, just as when we were in the service, we believed that we acted with the best possible interests of the country at heart, we must equally trust those who are today in office to act in that fashion. And unless there is real proof to the contrary, I, for one, will not sit on the sidelines and throw stones at anyone. Uh, which is not to say that we have to all agree to everything, but I would rather say that this is a time for national unity and solidarity. Yes, the government has a major role to play in its domestic strategic communications. Perhaps that can be improved. And I think it's happening. And I thought the External Affairs Minister's speech of the 28th January was a very clear effort in that direction. And there are actions taking place behind the scenes of which we know nothing. So why not give benefit of doubt to the system and say that they are doing the best they can? That said, it is also, I would conclude with two large points really. First, we have to align our relationships with our neighborhood and with other powers in the best manner that we can. And I think we are doing this. Remember, when Prime Minister Modi came to office, he put forward the slogan, neighborhood first. Now tell me, was it necessary to say that? I fear it was, because we had rather begun to take our neighborhood for granted. I will not embarrass colleagues, former colleagues of the service by asking them to remember how many years had passed since a head of government from India had visited several of our neighboring countries, with the exception of Bhutan, Nepal, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka. Until Prime Minister Modi, when was the previous bilateral visit to that country? Now, a summit meeting is not an end in itself, but a summit meeting implies that there is a whole putting together of dossiers, of issues, of things that have been pending for a long while on which actions are taken. I don't have to say that to you. You know it very well. So we can do much more vis-a-vis working with neighbors. And my absolutely final point, we have to be a lot smarter in working with the other great powers. Some we cultivate by fits and starts. That said, the other large question is we have to have a national effort at mobilizing the economy to produce the very best results we possibly can. A few days back, there was a closed door discussion on RCEP, and some of my friends here attended that. One of the thoughts put forward at that meeting was that we should not question the decision taken on RCEP because that is the decision already taken. Now, that is a kind of area in which there is room for discussion, room for debate. The more so, RCEP is not an end in itself, but it is a stepping stone to achieving the larger growth of the national economy. And at the end of the day, whether we agree on RCEP or not is not that important. What is important is that we have to have a massive effort today at rebuilding India, at building India's economic strength, on which is predicated everything else, including India's foreign policy. Thank you very much. I have probably spoken longer than I should have. My apologies, Shyam. Shyam has to unmute.
Ambassador Saran, you are muted. Ambassador Saran? Yes.
Yes. Yeah. You were unmuted and again.
I think you're muted again.
Yeah, okay. It's nice. It's okay now.
No, because I think the host had muted me, so I could not unmute myself. Sorry about that, Ambassador Rana. Let me just say that this was an absolutely magisterial presentation that you made. This was not just about China's diplomatic behavior, but I think you have given us a kind of a tour de horizon of China's, its foreign policy. It's the institutional framework that underlies, foreign policy making, and some of the important changes that have been taking place over the last several years. So thank you for an extremely thought-provoking presentation. Let me just make a couple of points, not in terms of contesting what you have said, but just perhaps to offer one or two insights from my side. One is that I also noticed that the party's own international liaison department has become a very important player in diplomacy, in foreign policy. So the example that I give is what happened recently with Nepal, where it was actually a international liaison department delegation which came to Nepal to try and sort out the problems within the ruling party. So that's something new. We see an activism by that liaison department encroaching into what may be regarded as state-to-state state-to-state relations, which perhaps was not so much the case before. Although the liaison department was, of course, important, but its role was mostly with party-to-party relations. One can maybe argue that, oh, in Nepal also, you had a communist party that was involved. But I think the role went beyond just, the party relationship. So the importance of the party acting through the party committee on foreign affairs, where there is some powerful interests within the party are represented. I think that's something new. The second point I would like to make is that some of the kind of aggressiveness or assertiveness that we are looking at, this is something which is being given a kind of a sanction at the highest level. So if I look at, for example, the speech of Xi Jinping, which was released in Chusher magazine just some time ago, although the speech itself was made in April. But it has only now been full text has been released. What is very interesting is that Xi Jinping is talking about, of course, that China is facing a much more challenging external environment than it has before. As he says, this is a once in a century kind of situation that we are facing, completely unprecedented. And therefore, you need a different kind of approach to this external environment. And in that context, he makes the point that, China is, of course, much more powerful than it was before, but it has not quite arrived where it wants to be in terms of, for example, its peer, say, the United States. So in that, he uses this very interesting, sort of phrase from the past, that is that China must have the assassin's mace. The assassin's mace being that even if you are weaker than your opponent, you should have the ability asymmetrically to try and overcome the challenge that you are getting. So he talks very specifically about China's need to have this assassin's mace. And the other point that he's making, which is with respect to what we have seen in terms of its behavior with, say, Australia, or behavior with some of the other countries, the willingness to use punitive measures against partners. And in that, he has said that, number one, we must make certain that these international supply chains, global supply chains, China should be now in control. That is, we must have supply chains where the control lies with China. That is something which is very important. And why is that necessary? He says that we must be able to do this so as to form a powerful countermeasure and deterrent capability against foreigners who would artificially try to cut off supply to China. So that's one aspect, that we must learn how to use this as a deterrent capability. And at another point, he also mentions the concept of weaponization of interdependency. That is, China should be in a position where, in case there is pressure on it, it should be able to respond through these capabilities that it has. So this is a different way of managing the international environment, which, even though we say China is perhaps in the most powerful, in a phase where it is most powerful throughout its history, in a sense, but it is also a reflection of a certain vulnerability, even a certain insecurity. I mean, it's a paradox. The greater the power you have, and yet you seem to have greater insecurity than before. And this is the dilemma that you constantly see appearing. Lastly, I would just like to mention that something which is worth looking at is that the kind of wolf warrior diplomacy is not evident in dealing with the current border issue with India. And it is, one should ask the question, why is it that when Doklam happened 2 years ago, if you look at the rhetoric at that time, it was in fact very much wolf warrior kind of a rhetoric. And yet we see that in the current situation, which is a more serious situation, there is almost a deliberate effort to try and downplay it. We don't see much wolf warrior, rhetoric on this, as you have pointed out, Ambassador Rana, that the reaction to EAM's speech has been, let us keep the border issue away from other aspects of the relationship, almost suggesting that the border issue is not so important as to really impact other aspects of our relation. Of course, the reality is different. But I think we should also try to answer that question. Why is there a difference in terms of the reaction? So these are just my sort of two-bit observations, and really you have made a very illuminating presentation. I think these are aspects of China's foreign policy behavior that we should really ponder over. Thank you very much, Ambassador Rana. Would you like to react before I
make a brief comment?
Floor? Yeah, please.
Can I make a brief comment? I mean, you are a person that I have hugely admired for a very long time. I don't have to tell you that.
Thank you. I'm privileged.
You have really added so much more to the discussion with the insights you bring. But you're right. The Chinese method of weaponization is a very interesting one. China was the first country in the world to weaponize its tourist flows to other countries. You would remember that when Turkey began to speak out on events taking place in Xinjiang, the Chinese told them very plainly that the number of tourists visiting Turkey from China, which had already become something like 30 or 40% of the total, will be cut back sharply. And Turkey somewhat fell in line after that, or shall we say, quietened down a little bit. There is, all the other points you mentioned are very valid. Why the rough treatment has not been delivered on our current border standoff in Ladakh is an extremely interesting point. Again, goes to show that, and that is why the word undiplomatic really was in quotation marks, that what we think as undiplomatic is in fact another kind of diplomacy. And it is a much more nuanced diplomacy than many people imagine. So for me, the word wolf warrior is a total misnomer, and I think it is even irrelevant, frankly. But it's a two-word shorthand for a certain way of functioning. You would also have noticed that Canada, which was very much in the firing line a year and a half back, when this lady was arrested in Canada, is no longer in the news very much. And in a similar fashion, while contemns with Japan continue, Japan is also not subjected to the kind of harangues, the kind of blunt statements that others have faced. So there is a great deal of nuancing in that policy that has always taken place. But thank you very much. You really enriched the discussion so much more. I'm ready to deal with any questions, anything that you may now direct. Thank you, Shyam.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you. So I'll open the floor. I'm not able to see who is asking the question. Perhaps Ashok or Richa can perhaps help me out with that.
I have my chat window open.
So we have a few questions in the chat box.
Sure.
So
sure. Thank you, Richa.
So if you would like to call upon the participants, we could start with Professor Manoranjan Mohanty. So would
Okay,
you
I
like to
think
ask?
since you are able to see who are the people asking, will you please just ask them one by one to raise their question?
Sure,
Perhaps
sir. Yeah. So we could.
Ambassador Rana can take 2 or 3 questions at one go, and then
Thank you.
we'll be able to cover more maybe.
Sure. So I
Oh,
would like to invite Professor Manoranjan Mohanty to ask his question.
okay. Thank you, Kishan. It was a very illuminating talk. Now, I had a specific question about your very important point about the proposition about currently the diplomacy being under huge party pressure. Can you go back and identify certain periods in the recent history when relatively there was less party pressure on diplomacy?
Manu, you are such a past master of the game that I cannot respond to your question with anything affirmative, because I know that you will find loopholes on it very
No,
fast.
no.
No, seriously.
No, I think it's
No,
serious.
of course.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
of course.
Because I had never thought in those lines. So that's a very important formulation.
So,
Yeah.
the interesting point today is, of course, in China, the party and the state are essentially jumelage. They are together in every sense of the word. That's how that system functions. And the party is the dominant partner. But there was a greater stress on professionalism in the foreign ministry in the past. And I think that stress on professionalism has probably now somewhat begun to fall by the wayside. It's falling for a variety of reasons, as I suggested, because the professionals themselves want to be seen as party animals, if I can use that term in a very, very different sense in which the term is usually used. They are first and above all card-carrying members of the party, and they want to be seen to be assertive if that is what the party wishes them to be. There is that. So, without going too far, I would say that I think it is during the Xi Jinping regime that there is this stronger stress on the party taking control and being guided much more than before. I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but I think this is a kind of tentative conclusion that others have also reached, and Jabin among them, for example. I hope I have responded to your query.
Thank you.
Richa, we can take 2-3 questions at a time now, please.
Sure, sir. Next we have Ravi Bhujulingam asking a question on chat. So if you would like to unmute yourself and ask a question yourself.
Thank you, Kishan, for a brilliant presentation and very, very, very comprehensive, as always. I wanted to take your view that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in China relatively ranks lower down in the pecking order. Want to trace it back to historical days and go back to the time when Foreign Affairs was divided into the Barbarian Affairs Commission, the Li Fan Yu, and so on, and ask whether this tradition has been long established in China, and hence the ministry is really seen as a body where people execute orders rather than apply thought, and therefore the application of thought is really the province of the top leader and maybe 1 or 2 people. You mentioned the example of Zhou Enlai, and if that hypothesis is correct, then the only way the foreign ministry could stand out is to be, as it were, more loyal than the king in its pronouncements. They would follow the leader in what he says. Where he is aggressive, they would do likewise. Where he is relatively not, as Shyam has pointed out, in some areas, they would be equally muted. And that may be the one possible hypothesis to explain this behavior. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. So I would like to add one more question from the chat box. So we have one question from the YouTube channel. How do you see Luo Chaohui being promoted to the post of Vice Foreign Minister after serving as the ambassador to India? And Liu Chinsong becoming the Director General of Policy Planning Department in MOFA shortly after serving India? That's it.
I'll take the second question first because it's very easy to answer. In fact, what you call promotion to the post of Vice Foreign Minister is not accurate. China is the only other country that I know, apart from Germany, which attaches seniority to posts. And around the world, there are 8 or 9 places where the ambassador has vice minister rank. And Delhi is one of them. So Mr. Liu Xiaobo was in fact already of vice minister rank when he returned to the home country. But you're right, he holds a very important position today because I think he is also the executive vice minister. That is to say, he is the top vice minister in the entire system. The foreign ministry has about 7 or 8 vice foreign ministers. And that applies to the other gentleman also, who has become DG policy planning. That is to say, he was obviously the number 2 in Delhi, and that also is a senior position. As for what Ravi said, I mean, Ravi knows the situation extremely well, and I can only agree with him that it is the case that those who are in the hierarchy will follow the lead from the top. And of course, the party has always been the mainspring of the system. But it is not a small matter that up until quite recently, nobody of the foreign ministry family, if I may use that term, referring not only to the current officials of the foreign ministry or the foreign minister himself, but also previous foreign ministers, nobody had been in Politburo rank till, I believe, the mid-90s. In the mid-90s, there was a member of the foreign ministry hierarchy who attained Politburo rank. But it's not a name that is very familiar. I certainly don't remember the name, but I was told that by someone. The larger point is that in other countries, foreign ministries typically enjoy higher status. And this has rankled with Chinese officials, diplomats, for a long time. Thank you. Risha?
Thank you, Ambassador Rana. Ambassador Saran, do you want to intervene?
No, I just wanted to say that I was again unmuted. I mean, hello, can you hear me?
Okay, yes, we can hear you.
No, I just wanted to say that I was put on mute again, so that's why, yeah.
Okay. Do we have any more questions?
Maybe I can have a little conversation with Ambassador Rana if he is prepared to indulge me for a few more minutes.
Please go ahead, sir.
Yeah. So, one of the things that I also wanted to perhaps draw attention to is the fact that unlike in many countries, you find that in China, but not only in China, but also, for example, in Russia, it is usually a professional who becomes a foreign minister. And that tradition has, in fact, continued in China for quite some time. So there is also that that little nuance that we should have, that unlike, for example, in our country, until Jaishankar became the foreign minister, it is very rare to have a professional heading, in fact, the foreign ministry as a political leader. And that is also something that is perhaps worth noting in the case of China. That yes, the party is certainly very important in terms of the leadership that it provides, but it also takes into account the fact that professionalism is important in a top position like that, and it has all along, in fact, ensured that the person heading the ministry itself is, in fact, a professional. So that's one aspect that I wanted to draw attention to. The second aspect that I wanted to also draw attention to, something which you have, I think, written about in your book, that a tremendous amount of focus on language training. I think the China, even though there may be a limited budget, but I think it has been spending quite a lot of resources in language training for its diplomats. And today, some of their diplomats are really very, very fluent in foreign languages, not just English. But if you see, for example, even in countries like Nepal or in Myanmar, I have come across Chinese diplomats who are really very, very fluent in the local language. And that's something which is worth perhaps noting, that there is an effort to maybe advance professionalism amongst their diplomats. The third point that I wanted to make also in this connection was that we are seeing now some degree of drawing into the foreign ministry people from other, particularly from the academic side. So I have come across people, for example, in the Fudan University, who have served here in India for 3 years or 4 years at second secretary level or first secretary level. So there is maybe an incipient move to have that kind of greater openness in terms of allowing others to come in and perhaps go back to academics, which it helps them in terms of the academic or research work that they are doing. So just wanted to draw attention to these three other elements.
Thank you. Let me add a few words. You're absolutely right. The major embassies of China always have an academic on the embassy rolls. And that person's task it is to sustain connections with counterpart think tanks and institutions. I think it's an extremely good method. It's something that we could also learn from. As far as I know, they are not taken into the foreign ministry as such, but they serve for 3 or 4 years. And that's a splendid method. Number two, from the outset, China has had an extremely robust program of study of foreign languages. At the China Foreign Languages University, there are in fact 2 of them in Beijing. I lectured at one of those for a week or 10 days. They said with some pride that we teach nearly 60 foreign languages. And from the outset, the top interpreters in the major languages have had a fluid entry into the foreign ministry and have served in top positions in the foreign ministry. Some of them were Premier Chou En-lai's interpreters, etc., and they have become ambassadors. They were completely regarded as part of the foreign ministry. So in that sense, that is in fact a second entry window into the foreign ministry, that is those who are language specialists. You had another point which I now forget, but it will come to me in a while. Rija, if there is anything else, I see there is a comment from one Mr. Anup Bodade, who has asked, why is China becoming more active now, unlike
Previously using
previous
vessel state like
using
Pakistan and North Korea.
using Pakistan and North Korea? Is it due to Xi's personal ambition? I don't think it's so much a matter of personal ambition. It is part of a strategy, a policy whose origins are really unclear for us. I don't think, I don't know anyone who has said with confidence that I understand what is going on the Ladakh border right now, the why and the wherefore of it. Frankly, I am puzzled, and many others like me probably are puzzled. But maybe Shyam has some thoughts to share on this. I mean, Shyam, you are in effect a co-panelist with me, whether you like it or
No, I have no such ambition, I can assure you. Yeah.
So
No,
we,
I don't. I agree with you. I don't think it is a matter of ambition. But I think you pointed out earlier in your presentation that with the expansion of China's engagement internationally, in particular the BRI and the sort of deployment of very valuable economic assets, both near and far. The temptation or sometimes even the necessity of you know intervening in domestic politics, domestic affairs, in order to safeguard your assets. This is something which, to me, it seems to actually quite a normal progression, because the more assets you have abroad, the greater the pressure to try and safeguard them. Now, if you look at the kind of assets which are now what China has acquired in Pakistan, I'm not surprised that there is a very strong presence in Pakistan, including some PLA presence for security reasons, which we have not seen before. So I think we should expect more of the same. Even what has been drawn attention to, for example, in Australia, the fact that they have been using the some of the political figures from political parties, or they have been using the Chinese diaspora community in order to advance a certain narrative, or to to advance their interests. This is something which is quite normal. You would not have perhaps made such a big deal about it, because the Americans do it all the time. So, China is maybe somewhat of a newcomer to the game, and therefore it seems to be much more threatening. But this has been happening, all the time across the world. So we will see more of this as China's interests, external interests, in fact, expand. As I believe they will continue to expand. What I find also very interesting is that the Chinese have managed to achieve something which we tried to but could not. If you recall, when I was foreign secretary, and then when Shankar Menon took over, we tried very hard to set up an Indian international developmental agency, which would be autonomous, but would be in a sense guided by the Ministry of External Affairs, and it would have its own budget, and it would have its own financial advisors, so that it would not be subject to the somewhat very unpredictable control of the finance ministry. Despite a great deal of effort on our part, we were not able to achieve that. So I'm somewhat envious that the Chinese have actually managed to do that, recognizing how important an armed development cooperation is with respect to foreign policy.
Absolutely. Um, uh, Rija, I don't want to take over your role, but if we've run out of questions, I mean, we can wind up
So we have
whenever
one.
you give the signal.
We have one more question, one final
Okay.
question, if you may. Ambassador
Sure.
Goel,
Ah,
do you want to come in?
So, thank you very much, Rita.
good friend Suresh. Yes.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Sir, I just wanted to ask, during the ongoing border issue between India and China, the Galwan Valley, and Ladakh, etc., one has seen very few statements coming out of China at a level beyond the official spokesman. I don't recall seeing any statement even from the state councillor or any other level at all. Does it indicate they want to just play down the issue, or it's not important for them? What does it actually mean?
I think, Suresh, your guess on this is as good as anyone's, but it really does bring out the point that Shyam made, that while this has been a terrible, violent, life-taking kind of incident in which many casualties have been suffered on both sides, there has not been an effort to play it up. And that maybe also deserves reflection. I have no answer to that, quite honestly. But the point you make is entirely right. The Chinese have not gone beyond really the level of the official spokesman in addressing this issue. Our system is different. And you know, in our system, any number of personalities come in and speak. And that's how we are. That's how our system operates. Manu has made a very pertinent point that Chen Chi-Chen was also Politburo member. You're right, sir. I stand corrected.
So if you want to take one
So
more
John
question
De
from me.
Silva has a question about signing a border map agreement with the Dalai Lama. How can you sign a border agreement with somebody who's not in power, somebody who has no direct authority any longer, and who is essentially a religious leader in exile? I think this is rather, shall we say, not possible kind of issue. Shyam, we are back to you.
No, I just to say that we already have a agreement with Tibet, which is the McMahon line. That was an agreement which was already concluded with the participation of the then Tibetan government. By the way, also to be noted is that at that similar convention, each of the three parties brought with them their official credentials that they were representing. They were authorized as plenipotentiaries to represent their government. And these credentials had to be accepted by all the participants. So the fact is that the credentials of the then Tibetan representative was acknowledged by the Chinese representative, just as the Chinese representative credentials were also accepted by the Tibetan and the British side. So, I mean, just to say that actually there is, in fact, a agreement on what should be the border between Tibet and India. So, to the end of our Wednesday seminar today, it remains for me to just thank you very much for really giving us such a thought-provoking presentation, bringing out sometimes these are nuances which we do not notice. And sometimes these, in fact, contain many of the answers that maybe we are looking for. But I think it is also really worthwhile to note that like a good presentation, you have also raised certain questions which should, stimulate some further research, some further discussion, because I think these are very, very important points. For example, what was raised by Suresh Goyal, and which I also raised, that we should try to see why is there a difference in the rhetoric with respect to Doklam and the rhetoric with respect to Ladakh. Why is there not a People's Daily editorial of the kind which we saw during the Doklam affair? And here we see playing down. So what is it that China has in mind by this contrasting behavior? The other aspect is, I think we should be looking at, how the aspect that I also try to put across, that we are witnessing a situation where, though China is a much more powerful country today, and you are right, Ambassador Rana, that they are not going anywhere, they are not declining, they are probably going to become an even stronger power as we go along. And yet we see that with that power, it appears that instead of making China feel more secure, make China feel more confident, in fact, there seems to be almost a sense that China is under siege. So this is why I would very strongly recommend that the speech of Xi Jinping, which has appeared in Chosher, is really worth looking at carefully, because these contrasting sort of sentiments come out very, very clearly. On the one hand, he talks about, for example, deterrent capability that China must have so that it is able to punish others who try to dare to, harm China's interests. On the other hand, he says that we should prevent, weaponization of interdependency. We should not allow others to get into a situation where this interdependency can be used against others. We should try and see whether we can get international rules which prevent such bad behavior. Well, I mean, just in the first part of your speech, you have said how important it is for China to have the capability of that bad behavior, and then you are saying we must prevent that bad behavior. That contradiction is really something which is very striking to me, that with this power has also come insecurity, and many of the things that we are finding China is doing is perhaps traced to that contradiction. So many things to pursue further, many things to explore further. Thank you, Ambassador Rana, for such a stimulating conversation this afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry,
Thank you, gentlemen.
Muralidharan has not been able to speak, but I think we are really out of time, as Rija will tell us.
Time.
Sorry.
Yes. I'm sorry, we are really running short of time. So I'll have to wrap the session here. Thank you, gentlemen. It is always a pleasure listening to Ambassador Rana's insights on China.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ambassador Rana, for sharing your hard-hitting thoughts with the ICS audience today, and to Ambassador Saran for agreeing to chair the event and sharing your thoughts as well. With this, we come to the end of today's seminar. The recording of the video will be available on our ICS YouTube channel. Looking forward to seeing you all again next week. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you
Have
very
a good
much.
evening.
Thank you, Shyam.
Thank you. Thank you.